Hello, ladies. Welcome to our podcast today. My name is Fawn Preston, and this is Angel Prater and Dr. Dean Gray. We are here for the Are You Aware podcast, and today we're talking about housing. How's it going?
Good. Yeah, very important topic.
Yes, timely.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially here in Portland, where it's rough, right?
Yeah.
Just driving down the streets of Portland every day is stressful and sad sometimes, knowing how many people out there are unhoused. So let's chat about it.
Yeah. It's traumatic.
Yeah.
To drive around the streets here in town and see how people are suffering.
Yeah, absolutely.
From a lack of resources like housing.
Yeah, I think a lack of resources, and it's actually a little infuriating if you think about the historical Oregon culture and back when San Francisco, I don't remember the date, did the gentrification. They were handing out bus tickets for people who were losing housing and were going to be houseless. And they were giving out bus tickets to individuals to come up here to Oregon because it's not against the law to live out of a traditional structure house or residence. And Arizona did the same thing, I hear, back in the day. And so, when I think about individuals who do choose to live in or would like to live in a traditional residence, the lack of affordable housing, the lack of housing in general, is so astronomical. And then, we think about the individuals who may not want to live in a traditional structure and how to reduce the stigma and the judgment around the dominant culture and the value around having a structural house. And so I think this is a really good topic. And then the lack of resources to get people into housing first, instead of, saying, oh, you can get into housing. If you're in addiction, you have to stop using before you can get into housing. And I mean, it's just kind of a hot mess. So, and not to put it lightly, but it's infuriating.
Yeah, very sad. Very sad.
Absolutely.
Well, gosh, you brought up so many interesting things there, and I'm sure we're going to do a deep dive. But shall we start with our Aware highlight?
Yeah, absolutely. So I just wanted to talk about Reno's initiative for shelter and equality. Angel and I got invited out there last year-ish. We ended up training almost 70 individuals within their programming, and we got like an awesome tour of their program. And I don't know, I was just like super impressed. Our place is kind of their shelter entry, and they had multiple different housing types for different individuals, which I thought was just like absolutely amazing, including areas for people who had pets with little doggy doors so their dog could go out in the middle of the night. And that way they're not, going in and out of the front of the building. And housing for families, housing for mommies who are pregnant and new moms. And I don't know, it was just like a really great program. So I wanted to choose them as our Aware highlight for today. So
wow.
Yeah, they're doing a good job out there.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Doing some pretty amazing stuff. Yeah.
I think
and it was massive.
It was massive campus.
It was like a whole huge campus. And I was like, yes. And right.
Wow.
Like this, we need these models all over the country.
Yes, I think they also have a great need. I'm not sure what the legislation is around that, the numbers that drive the numbers, but I think Nevada is another state with a rather sizable
need
population of people.
And I believe some of them were wet houses, so they didn't require you to be clean and sober. They truly believe that housing is the first step to healing. And I mean, that's evident. They brought us out and to really talk about trauma awareness and to train their supervisors and some peer supports and do some great education to their community partners, like case managers, clinicians, et cetera. It was really pretty. I was really impressed.
Yeah, me too. It was awesome.
Wow.
Well, just to kind of like draw attention to the 5 core principles, I just wanted to, bring these up. So immediate access to permanent housing with no housing readiness requirements. And one of the things that I think that I've seen, across the nation with different program models is that they don't meet all 5 of these things. And that's one of the things, if you're really going down that rabbit hole of housing first, if you don't meet all 5, then it's not housing first.
Right.
It's something else.
Right.
You know, you've modeled it after housing first, but it's not housing first. And that was one of the things with Rise is I felt like they ticked all the boxes, you know, for being a true housing first initiative. Consumer choice and self-determination, huge, you know, not telling people how to manage their lives and their recovery, but letting them figure it out and making a menu, as Angel says. Recovery orientation, individualized and client-driven supports, and peer support is a huge part of, you know, housing first initiatives, because it's really about wraparound, you know, giving people choices and options, and having, you know, people like them who've been through it to, you know, help them, you know, walk that road together. And then social and community integration. And I just felt like they just ticked all the boxes. So
Wow.
we're good friends with Camille over there, and they are doing some awesome, awesome things. So we're proud of them.
Yeah, good work, guys.
Yeah, for sure.
Kind of badasses.
Excellent. So yes, why is housing important? I think one of the things that comes up in the work that we're doing is the idea that housing is considered a social determinant of health,
Mhm.
and we know that access to various resources will have direct implications on a person's quality of life and their health outcomes.
Mhm.
And so housing is one of those things, income, education, so literacy, access to insurance, other complex health needs. All of these would be considered social determinants of health. And there is strong evidence to suggest that addressing these needs for an individual can improve their quality of life and the health and wellness of the entire community, right? Because
Yeah.
that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about it affects everybody. It affects everybody. We were just saying that it's difficult even just to drive around Portland and to see the effects of the housing market and the challenges people have accessing resources. How it's hard to watch that.
It's despair, you
It
know,
is.
and it's hard to watch. Yeah, and it's like how, you know, in our cover, you know, photo and our title, we said, you know, how can you heal without housing? And, you know, that's one of the things that, you know, I've just seen consistently over the years since housing first has come into our equation is how can you heal from what's going on in your life? How can you heal from trauma and other things if you're actively being traumatized?
Right.
You know, you're staying in fight or flight for days, months, years, you know? And so to put someone into a housing situation doesn't fix everything, but at the very least, it fixes the immediate safety concerns of being outside, you know,
Right.
of sleeping outside.
Yes.
So
Yeah, I think
Cold
about
weather.
back in 97, 98 here in the Portland metro area. One of the ways that I was able to maintain, you know, I sought out to get off of drugs and get off the streets, get out of domestic violence, all of the things. And after I left left treatment, I got into transitional housing that allowed me 7 more months to kind of just work on healing. Though there were conditions, I had to remain clean and sober. I'm sure that they would have been a little flexible had I relapsed or something. But and then from there, I went into Lutheran Family Services, a program called Hope Springs, which then provided me rental assistance for 2 years in my own apartment.
amazing.
And then from there, I was able, and so that was 3 years in.
Yeah.
It took 3 years for me to get a Section 8 voucher, just to have continued housing, you know, rental assistance, because I couldn't do what I did on the streets. I couldn't do that put that on a resume, right? But then I was able to get some, because I was there, had this stability for 3 years. It helped me not only get the trauma support and healing and counseling and all the things with it. I was able to kind of change the trajectory of my career and get become an AmeriCorps member. And so then I was a AmeriCorps member for 3 years. And then I was given amazing health insurance that was way better than the Oregon Health Plan that I was on at that time. I mean, it really, really changed. I had food, I had the housing, I had I can't read all of the transportation, all of these things. That's what enabled. And by year 5, I purchased my first home. And I was able to do that because of these, basically wraparound supports
Yeah,
that allowed
steps.
me, the steps that allowed me to remain in one place longer than 6 months, because that was my norm. I couldn't stay anywhere longer than 6 months. I always ran from things, people, places, and things. So yeah, I think there is one. I just want to put in a little added shout out to somebody here locally that's been doing amazing work around affordable housing that addresses families, singles, and elder adults. And that's Community Partners for Affordable Housing, and AKA SEPA. And they're in the Washington County and Portland, Southwest Portland area. They build beautiful housing for individuals under 60% of the median income. And then there's integrated housing, and they don't have restrictions on, oh, you got to be clean and sober, though they do work with organizations, but we need more of those. We need more like, and they're quality housing. Like, they were built brand new. There was a couple that they remodeled, and purchased from people who were identified as slumlords, that didn't care how their people were living, and they made these places a place to be proud to live in.
Wow.
I sat
That's
on that
awesome.
board and advisory committees for 13 years.
Wow.
And it changed my life and many others. So yeah, I just thought I'd give that added shout out.
That's
a
amazing.
great story.
That was a squirrel moment.
Yeah.
ADD
Yeah,
is
no,
like
it's
a
good.
superpower, huh?
Wow. I love it.
No, it's awesome. It actually reminds me. So this was several years back, but I went out to Philadelphia to assess a program out there called Project Home, and they had all of these different steps. And so it was really interesting to think, like, they had a drop-in center, where everybody could come. They could use computers. They had case managers on hand. They had as many resources as you could possibly want, through the drop-in, and a shelter. And then through that shelter and that drop-in, you could apply for different levels. So you might be in like an SRO, like a single room occupancy, where you share a kitchen, you share a shower area, bathrooms. And then you'd move up to like a studio apartment, maybe after a year or so, with integrated services, helping you work on your credit, helping you work on, rental, help. And then they would move you up to the next. And the final outcome was homeownership.
Yeah.
And I just thought that was the coolest thing, to go from,
Wow.
completely houseless, with no resources, and then just completely stocking these resources and these supports around you this whole, duration of your time within the program, to eventually own your own home. And I just thought that was so awesome. Like, that is true housing first, the way it's supposed to look,
Yeah.
Yeah, I was the manager of a family houseless shelter in the Washington County area for a couple of years. And so when I did my analysis, this was back in early 2000s, I was able to notice back then the lack of family supportive, transitional, and permanent housing, affordable housing, and single fathers with children. There was nothing. And so I worked with Washington County Housing Authority, and they just purchased this big complex in Tigard that had been owned by a slumlord for a long time. And they had all these vacant units that they couldn't fill because of the old reputation of this complex. It was really gang run, and it was just a horrible place for anyone to have to live, because it was so much crime. And when they purchased it, they couldn't fill the units, and they were spending way too much money. So I asked them, I said, well, give me some units. And they gave me 12 for 1 year. And then we were able to create a plan with the people that were moving in there, if they had criminal backgrounds. Okay, so you have criminal backgrounds. What are you doing today to do something different? Let's create a neighborhood watch in this community, because they desperately need it. And so anyone who was living there could participate in this in this neighborhood watch, but it was driven by the people who had criminal histories. And then
Which is awesome.
and if they had like addiction challenges or whatever, they would start some sort of wellness or recovery support group in that community. And then if they had rental histories that were undesirable, like, evictions or whatever, they would They created some A to Z on how to buy a home, A to Z on rental tenant rights and responsibilities classes and they had this support. So we didn't call it peer support back then, but most of us that worked with them as case managers were individuals who understood what it was like to struggle. And so after 1 year and those 12 units or those 12 families, Washington County said you can have as many as you can fill in our county. And
That's awesome.
that just goes to show, and yeah, we didn't do all of the things that they do now, like, oh, we're going to give you a UA, though there were times when state involvement would require people to have to do UAs, but we weren't trying to micromanage. But if we had suspicion of use and it was affecting the community or the family, then we would ask, we're wondering what's up, and we'd do a UA. But for the most part, it really was, again, integrated housing. So we need to be cautious when we're creating these types of programs not to segregate people from general population, because that's more of the same, right? Those people over there. So sure, there could be some, those are, I mean, something's better than nothing, but that can't be the only way that we move people into really addressing all social determinants of health and creating community. We don't want everybody feeling like they have to be just with people with lived experience. How about general pop, right?
Yeah, very challenging. One of our greatest challenges, I think, because there's just such a strong sense of individualism and entitlement that tends to move people away from that kind of integration. And then it just brings us back to that sense of fear that people have of anything different or anything unfamiliar. That really makes it hard, even I think at a legislative level, to get these units approved when they're gentrifying these communities.
Absolutely. Well, so I love the idea of, there's so many buildings that aren't being used right now. I drive by and I see these government buildings and old schools and, old hotels, that could be used when we've got this many people currently houseless.
Right.
It just seems ridiculous,
Totally,
right, to not use them in some regard. But the true model of housing first is really about getting them into regular community settings, regular rentals, regular homes in neighborhoods with other folks, because the idea is not to silo people, into like, oh, this is what everybody looks like who's, currently dealing with houselessness, but really like bringing them from that point and then bringing them in and having them be in regular neighborhoods with regular people. That's that community integration piece, is like, let's get them back to, maybe even not even back to, maybe they've never had that kind of opportunity, or that comfort level, so I love the idea of using those places to kind of like get it started and then working it into where eventually people are just in the community and living their own lives, and maybe they need some help with rental assistance and still need support, but that's okay.
Who doesn't?
DEV Northwest is doing that piece. DEV Northwest, they are providing rental assistance for 2 years, including utility assistance in those rental units, that young people under the age, I think, of 26, to help them become housed. And they're not requiring UAs, any kind of program like that. They are, the requirement is the young person has to seek out and find somebody to rent to them, with a letter saying that their rent is paid for the 2 years. And that's beautiful. I just learned about that 6 months ago. So that's one model, right? Lots of different model ideas, but the housing first piece, before requiring all of these behavior changes, right? Or whatever. So
well, and that's hard too, right? Because Gosh, I love the idea of that. But I actually am working with somebody right now who is looking for a house, 3 bedrooms. She's got 2 kids and she's getting ready to have a baby. And she has spent $700 already on application fees and been turned down over and over and over again. And it's just so frustrating. I
And she's
know
a
it's
professional with a career.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
but her background
And
is
she
in the way.
has some programs paying for things as well. She's, a member of a tribe, and the tribe is helping, with the financial part of it, but still been turned down so many times that, she's out $700.
Wow.
So it's, lots of barriers, lots of barriers. So, I feel like getting this information out in itself is important, because, maybe more landlords out there will, go down the rabbit hole. We're going to add links to all of our stuff so that people can, learn more on their own accord. And, maybe we'll have more landlords out there willing, to take in folks who have a blemished past.
Or investors. Investors, I think, have a great opportunity to invest in properties that can really put an effort into affordable housing very specifically. And there's a lot of money out there that can help support creating these types of programs, especially nowadays, right? But they're just not available. To the rental units aren't available, or the investors or landlords aren't available or willing to make those adjustments. There's a lot of stigma around it. And then what about also individuals who don't necessarily want to live in a house?
Yeah.
What about properties designated for small tiny homes? Or, we used to have here in Portland, and I know it became kind of well, not an eyesore, but a lot of people had a lot of opinions around it. What was it called? Dignity Village, where it used to be out in the industrial area, and it was where people could take their tents and go live out in this community of people who were living without traditional housing structures. And yes, it did have a lot of drugs that filtered through there, and so people got really upset about that, closed it down, what have you. And actually, that could be a nice solution in some contexts for individuals who want to live in tent housing or live as if they're living on nature. Why can't we find areas where people can go to live in the way that they choose?
Yeah. Well, and when I hear that, I think there wasn't enough supportive services then, right? Like if it was an eyesore, if it was, some of these other things, then there wasn't enough supportive services, because if you've got services wrapping around that, village, let's say, there's somebody taking care of mess, right? They're cleaning up. You have peer supports who are coming in, doing things with people, hosting things, having activities. Maybe it's yoga in the morning. There are things happening and going on that are improving the vibrance of that property. And that, in my brain is, a great idea. I would love to see that, because then, you have lots of people in one location. Now you can bring in mobilized everything, mobilized showers, mobilized laundry, harm
Mobilized
reduction
healthcare.
services,
Healthcare,
mobilized
dental care,
healthcare,
Education.
veterinarian services.
Yeah, absolutely. It just makes it a hub, to where not only do they have a safe place to live that's managed in some regards, so safety is not an issue, and cleaned up so that that's not an issue, but then also bringing everything in so it localizes everything, to where, people can get access to things like healthcare that they weren't able to if they were on the trail, let's say.
They're sort of doing that now in downtown Portland, in one small area, just on the north side of Burnside, not too far from the train station. And I know that because my ex had lived houseless for quite some time, and he graduated up into a small tiny home that they have in this community, and that's where he was able to get connected with a case manager that helped him get into. Now, after 12 years, he's living in his own studio apartment. He has some mental health conditions, occasionally overutilizes alcohol that doesn't help him, right? And maybe other things. But the point is they did not, they don't have those mandates. They just want to get him to housing. And, being on Social Security and all the things, he can afford it with that subsidy and with the supports to even getting in because, coming from being a business owner and then he had some mental health stuff and then lost his way and then just ended up living on the streets for a really long time. A lot of people just slammed doors on him. And even though he had pristine credit, had an amazing career with this company for a long time, and then that happened, and now he was judged and seen as, just somebody to throw away. And then he's a little hard to deal with at times because of his mental health stuff. But that doesn't give anyone the right to deny something for someone to get back on their feet or thrive. And so that just happened recently. So I know that Oregon has some things that they're doing, just not, across the country, it's just not enough. And we need to educate the community about stop judging and seek to understand because you don't know what's really going on in someone's life that leads them there.
Yeah.
I think it's worth pausing on that. Yeah. Stop judging.
Yep.
Yeah. Acknowledge, check your bias, check your assumptions, and just because you value X doesn't mean we need to push that X onto someone else. Explore, who the person is before what you think you're seeing and the negative judgments that come along with that.
Well, and that's the trauma awareness, right? Rather than what's wrong with you, what happened to you?
How did you get here?
Yeah. How did you get here?
What's happened?
Yeah.
What brought you to this place?
And that re-traumatization in that system is what's going to detour people from even asking for help or, getting involved, in services that, help them stay housed.
I think about that story that you share when we're teaching about the man, and that's
Jim.
not his norm. Would you like to share kind of another example?
Totally. So this was, years back, but I went to a conference in DC and we were on DuPont Circle, which anybody who's been there knows it's very beautiful and very poshy. People are, walking around in their beautiful outfits and drinking their cocktails, their shiny shoes, and
With their
with their pinky up,
No judgment.
No
Just
judgment.
saying it's really cute.
It's
We're
really
not
cute.
from that
We love it.
lifestyle. So.
And while we were there with SAMHSA, basically, we were there speaking for SAMHSA and doing some trainings. And every night we would go down and we would have dinner and we would take half of our dinner because the portions are pretty big in DC. And so we'd separate our dinner into a couple of different containers and we would take them down to DuPont Circle and we would use them as an opportunity, to kind of strike up a conversation, with the local folks there, the house, our houseless neighbors and, connect with people. And we went down and I had this great big box full of seafood, crawdads and all this stuff. And I said, hey, is anybody hungry? And a blue tarp popped up and this guy sits straight up and he's like, I'm hungry. And so we went over and, gave him food and he asked us who we were and what we did. And we sat down and we were having a great conversation with him. And he just knew everything. He was just so smart. We talked about houselessness and we talked about addiction and we talked about recovery and all of these things. And he was telling us about services there and all of the amazing programs that they have. And it was just this really great conversation and this really kind of naive moment. I said, so I'm I got to ask you a question. I'm you're awesome. I'm you're so smart. I'm why are you houseless? And he kind of looked at me funny, and he said, so question, he said, if you won $1 million today, he's what would you do? What would you buy? What's the first thing, you'd pay for? And I said, I live in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and we bought this great big old farmhouse in the city. And, it's kind of a money pit and everything's going awry. And, if I was going to pay for something big, I would pay off that house so that it just wasn't a stress anymore. I love that big old house. It's got all this history. I'd probably, pay off that house. And he goes, you wouldn't live up there? And he points, and DC is just stretching, with beautiful buildings. And I kind of looked up and I see all these glowing buildings and I go, no, not really my style. I'm like, I love that big old farmhouse in the city. And he's like, oh, interesting. So, that penthouse, that's not your style. It's not your normal. And the minute he said it, I was like, uh-oh, here we go. He knows.
You're about to
He
get
knows.
schooled.
He knows. And I said, no, it's not my normal. And he said, well, he said, that big farmhouse in the city with all its problems and all its debt and the neighborhood association. He goes, that's not my normal either. He goes, that's not your normal? He said, that's not my normal. He said, you see this guy over here? This is, Charlie, let's say. He goes, you see that guy over there? That's Bob. He's like, that's my family. He said, and, we don't have to worry about, the electric company coming in and shutting us down, or the neighborhood association complaining about how long my grass is, or telling me that I need to fix my sidewalk. And he said, and we're a family and we look out for each other and we help each other. He goes, and I am comfortable in what I'm doing right this second. This is my normal. And it just changed everything, in the way that I thought about it, because I'm looking at him who's telling me like what the best bottle of wine for the price is in DuPont Circle, and what the most amazing services are in all of, DC, and thinking to myself, like, you should be homeless. Like that was my, narrative, because of my lens. Because my lens said
homeless or
that he
houseless.
shouldn't be houseless.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's not up to me to decide, or anybody else to decide, because if that's his normal, if that's his comfort level, then that's okay. And so it definitely changed how I felt in the future, about people who are living unhoused, especially out here where there's not a ton of snow and it stays reasonably, it's not warm. I'll not lie about that, but it's definitely different than Michigan. Yeah, it's not Michigan.
Yes, but we have to remember people are dying out there in the
Yeah,
tents.
absolutely.
From exposure.
So how about some sort of way for those who want to live in tents and in sleep bags that we supply, or there's resources supplied that keep people warm and keep
Yeah, and I think maybe on a small scale, people are out there doing that work, but there's not infrastructure and there's not awareness because we do have people dying of exposure, which is just an abomination in a place like this where there is so much wealth.
Absolutely.
Yes, and and again, it's about the barriers that keep people from coming in to get the help that they need. Yes, it's really it's very challenging, very challenging, I think, to overcome some of those barriers. But
awareness. Awareness,
Yeah.
advocacy, wellness, action, recovery, and education. We need to get some awareness out there.
We do. We do. We do.
Yeah. Well, and I think that that's, how we can help, is really by spreading awareness. Excuse me. I think that we can really, spread awareness and, help programs who don't quite understand exactly how housing first works, really put, proper, design into their programming. We, met with somebody like not too long ago who, is a billionaire in Oregon. And he's getting ready to roll out some villages that, are for houseless populations. And it's an amazing thought, right? It's an amazing gift, to gift something like that to, Portland, Oregon. But almost immediately we were looking at each other like, okay, but you're missing things, right? You're missing the wraparound, services. You're missing the training. That everybody needs to be trained in trauma-aware care, and the idea that, this is just going to fix things, right? 16 units or whatever, it was. There needs to be a way to cycle people through a program because the need is always there. The demand is always high,
right.
So to put somebody into housing and just like let them sit there, without wraparound services isn't helping. It's a nice thought,
right.
It's a good step in the right direction, to get them housed for the safety factor.
So I think the
But-
point is, it's not just about the housing,
No,
right?
It's
And it
not.
never is. It's not
Mhm.
just about the drugs. It's
Mhm.
not just about the trauma.
Yeah.
It's a very complicated social problem.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, we're complicated beings.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's really important to have an awareness of when you're pushing your own agenda from maybe a funder's perspective, right?
Mhm.
You might be like, dun, 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 you know, I want to help and I
Yeah.
can and I feel great about this and awesome.
And I just want to get
um,
those homeless people off my block.
that too.
Gonna put them
And-
over there in
That
in
happens
housing.
too. Mhm.
or I think that there's the need for all types and all good work that people want to do. And you've got faith-based communities, great, and some are very rigid on you have to participate in this in order to receive it. Some are more relaxed and just get it, right? Like, here, let's just house and keep people safe. And then you've got the recovery community saying, you can only come stay here for this and rent this room if you have clean UAs. And then you have the mental health housing that has a much better grasp on it today that I think
so too.
than others, because they're just honoring the person's journey like New Narrative does. And without a bunch of rigorous and rigid rules that require you to do in order to keep what should be, a human right is housing. So anyway, yeah.
I would
go
actually,
ahead.
I would like to speak to that, to the language of being unhoused. I just use that, the nomenclature homeless, and we're actually trying to get away from that.
Yeah.
We're trying to get away from that because it seems to imply that there is something wrong with the person. They are less than.
Yeah. A lot of stigma, I think,
Yes.
around that word. I had a guy say to me, he was living in his car, and I used the word homeless. This was years back, before I really kind of understood it. And he goes, "Who said I didn't have a home?"
Right.
And he was offended, and I had to be like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I had to check myself."
Yes. Happens to me in my work as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's why we use like houseless neighbors or unhoused.
We use a lot of
Currently
person first language.
Yes.
And so a lot of people don't realize the negative connotations that come with certain labels and like, a bum, right? A person who might be trying to get their needs met, right? And asking for money.
A street person.
Or a street person. You're
Homeless.
creating this and adding to the stigma around a negative judgment around something that you may not understand. And so then we say people with, or people who are living
experiencing.
living in tents, or people who are unhoused, or people who are living houseless, always with people first. And that actually, there's a lot of evidence that shows like how the shift of perspective changes when we focus on the person rather than what we see as problematic or a diagnosis or a deficit. And that language actually came from back in the day with people who have been diagnosed with developmental differences or quote unquote disabilities. And that is a real thing. And so
Oregon led the charge on that back in the 70s.
Really?
Yes, on the whole
Right?
person first language.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
For people with developmental disabilities. Yes. So maybe we can do that again.
Yeah.
Let's light a fire under Oregon and see if we can bring some trauma awareness and help people
help people get to a different place.
Yeah, get to a different place that really can serve the needs of these communities that are struggling.
Yeah.
They're struggling, I think, because of a lack of access to resources.
Well, and it's kind of the menu thing too, kind of that drives home or segues into, ensuring that, we don't, sure, we can have these beautiful wraparound services, but when they're mandated is when people resist even going into these places, right?
Mhm.
Because again, it's about their autonomy. It's about the self-determination, self-actualization, right? We want to ensure that at least there are a menu of options that people can choose from
Mhm.
for supports. And who knows, maybe somebody is surviving while using drugs to survive as a survival skill. And maybe they're just starting to slowly access one menu at a time. But who knows? If they live, hopefully they do. That's where we're trying to get to, right?
Yep.
Maybe at some point they'll realize that recovery is possible, right?
Mhm.
Or maybe they'll want to get some trauma therapy, or maybe they'll want to do some sort of shift in their life. And guess what? Whose life is it anyway?
Whose
If
life
they
is it
don't,
anyway?
that's okay too. But here's where I think society and a lot of naysayers will say, well, then why should we provide them with these resources? Well,
Right.
because A, it's the right thing to do, and B, that's a human right.
Right.
And C, our
Right.
federal government gives lots of money to be able to do so.
Yes, they do.
The resources are there.
The resources
resources
are
are
there.
there. The resources are there. We're spending the money, but we're not seeing the desired outcomes
Yeah.
because of the way the programs are being
Yeah.
run. That's what we know.
Mhm.
That's what we know.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. Everything
yeah.
kind of being siloed to different areas. That was one of the things too that, just in thinking about like how can Aware help. So one of the things that, Aware does is we have something called Aware Communities. And so, we help design, trauma aware spaces, because trauma informed environments is just as important as, trauma aware service delivery. And so, a drop-in center that I ran in Michigan, was the best in the state. It was awesome. I'm super proud of that project. I ran it for 10 years. And through that process, really learned a ton about how amazing a traditional style drop-in center can be for creating that hub, that menu of services. And I don't see that a lot here. Like we have things that label themselves as drop-ins here, and it's
Maybe
not
before COVID.
Yeah,
Good luck
yeah,
finding any of
right?
those services at the moment.
Well, and just the model,
Yeah.
like a
Mhm.
drop-in is an actual model, and somewhere where you can drop in and take a catch a meeting isn't a drop-in.
Right.
That is somewhere that's like URS or one of these organizations where you can go and get a meeting at any time of day, and that's great, for people who want a meeting. But what about people who want to do 2 loads of laundry?
Yeah.
Or people who want to learn how to cook, and learn a skill,
Mhm.
and so that's what we made Unlimited Alternatives in Grand Rapids, was this hub of all kinds of things, a menu. So things were running all day long that were different. We had
Gardening.
yoga, we had
Mhm.
gardening,
Mhm.
we had a food pantry on site. You could do your laundry, you could play pool, and so people literally just would come through there all day long, hundreds of people a day. They would use the computers, they would take a cooking class. We all cooked together, we ate together. There was this very like community, family, feel, and providers loved it.
Yeah.
Because providers could come in on a Friday or, every Friday at 2:00, and know that they had about 100 people at their access all the time. So WIC came there, Planned Parenthood came there, Cherry Street Health Services, which was mental health and addiction treatment. And so, we really built this amazing partnership with all these stakeholders in the area who all used our place as like a hub. And it was awesome.
Wow.
It was awesome. And I don't see a lot of that,
Yeah.
here. I see little pots, of like, okay, yeah, this is a drop in for meetings. This is a drop in for a food pantry, but that's not a drop in,
Right. Right.
So
We desperately need that model.
yeah, we need something big, something
Mhm.
big, something downtown that has all of those, stakeholders embedded so that people have everything that they could possibly ever want at their fingertips.
Wow.
They can all show up to one space.
And I
Yes.
think something big and then something smaller in different community pockets, right?
That'd be amazing.
That allows for those who really don't want to be downtown. Like I, Thanksgiving went, I was on my way downtown and I was at a board holiday party with DDA Oregon, and we had tons of leftover food. So I packed it all up, and some of it hadn't even been, like most of it hadn't even been touched, that was in the car. And I started driving to come downtown, and I was driving past in Southeast Portland, coming past, and I went under through this bridgeway far from downtown and far from this area even. And I noticed all these individuals that were just tented up under this viaduct. And so I just pulled over there and I got out and I'm like, hey, y'all hungry? And they all just started coming out. And then I was like, man, I'm telling you, I got all this food. And I'm like, why don't you guys go down, stay down, closer to downtown where there's more services? And we're like, we don't want to be down there.
Yeah, it's rough.
And I'm like, oh, makes sense. Okay. So they shared their journey. And then I was like, well, we kind of need some sort of like place to put the food. Man, they were just out. They grabbed all their trinkets and they created this big table. And then they got this big frame thing. And then they put a tarp on it. And then it kept the wind from coming. Like they knew everything. They were like, boom, 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 boom. And then they came and they created this little platform to put these burner things that I had in there from Olive Garden, you know, and they heat up the burner and they put this big frame there and then they said, watch, we got this. And they created it because I didn't have the little buckets and all their food was totally warm. And I'm like, had all these utensils and they were like, man, thank you so much. We don't ever, get extra anything because we're way over here and that's okay. And this was a real treat. And I'm like, yeah. So I was snapping pictures. I hung out for a couple hours and snapping pictures, meaning for the ones who were open for me to take pictures with and consent. And to use that as a teachable moment on social media, like we can every little bit counts. We can do this together.
Yes,
connection is key.
I love that story.
I need water.
Pause.
You got about 10 minutes.
Yeah, cool.
I love that story.
Yeah.
I just need a break, girls.
No worries.
Those itchy throat moments.
Way better.
Wow. The lack of things like that drop-in center probably is part of the reason why we're last in the nation for services.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
In treatment and recovery
There's
services.
just a huge disconnect, I think, within services. I mean, I work with a lot of folks. When I was at my last job, I had 400 active clients.
Yeah.
So I mean, I hear a lot about what's missing out there, and you would not believe how many times people call places, never get a call back. Get on lists, never hear a word back. There's a lot of no follow through out there. And I'm sure it's because they're busy.
Messages, never get a call back.
I get it that the need is great. The demand is great. But on the same token, something I know as being a person with my own lived experience is that when you're ready, you're ready.
Right.
And that window can close just as easily as it opened, So if somebody's ready, we need to jump on it, and not lose them in the shuffle.
Yeah.
Well, and then you've got people who are like, oh, they're just manipulating the system and all this stuff. If they're trying to get a need met, wouldn't you manipulate the system?
Yeah.
But we teach people how to get their needs met, right?
Yeah.
We're teaching them.
And we see it. I mean, I think sometimes people are unfairly critiqued for this because we see it at every level of society.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
We see it at every level of society. And in some cases it's applauded, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there is I think there is a culture. Again, it's that culture of individualism and, my needs first. Charity starts with me. And, if somebody else needs something, well, maybe there'll be something left over for that person.
One of the examples that I use as far as like getting our needs met is that, when I was using the food pantries, there was, if you look at this page and it's like, okay, how many people do you have in your house? And, based on how many people you have in your house, bases how much food you get. They want to give you like roughly, 3 days worth of food. And so when you don't have transportation and you have to take, a bus line, it takes you, an hour and a half, two
Or walk.
hours or walk to get there. You've got kids, maybe, bags for kids, all of the barriers that you have that you fight through to be able to go get that food box is even just getting it on a bus later, right? And then they say to you, how many people do you have in your household? And you have 4.
Wow.
Well, you're going to say 7 because you're going to want to make sure that you get enough food to not have to do this trip again, in 3 days. The hope is maybe I'll get 5
Right.
days, out of it. And so I feel like all of those kind of requirements, those things that keep us, those stringent, requirements, keep us having to do things like that and having to tell a little fib, to be able to get a little bit of extra food so that you don't have to do it again so often,
Yeah.
and so it's frustrating. And I understand, especially, I don't like feeling like somebody's getting one over on me. And so I can understand other people being like, oh, you think you're getting one over on me, don't you?
Yeah.
But if you're it's not your stuff, right? That food pantry food
Right.
isn't yours, so don't take it personal,
Right.
right? For one. And for 2, recognizing that, like, not what's wrong with you, but what happened to you. Why does that person exhibiting that behavior?
Right.
That tells me that person is trying to get a need met,
Getting a need met.
instead of, they're not just like, oh, hey, let's tell, Karen a fib because that'd be awesome.
Right.
There's a reason,
Yeah.
they don't want to have to tote that baby out again in 3 days, so they're going to get their needs met in the moment for, that particular situation, and move on,
Yes.
to the next thing.
Over time, I think, as we know, if that person feels safe and if you develop a relationship with that individual and you can establish trust, they can tell you exactly what's going on.
Absolutely.
I think the idea is just to keep them engaged for long enough until you can really figure out what it is they need and how you can help them get those needs met.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That trusted relationship. It's all about the relationship.
Yeah. Yep.
And you can really find out, the real deal of what's happening in there to really be able to even have any, opinion.
Right.
Or, we talk about asking permission and being like, hey, so, can I just give you an idea? This is something that worked for me. It might work for you. If you don't have a trusted relationship with that person, they don't want to hear any of it.
Right. Yes.
So, being able to have that real conversation and that trust so that when they really do divulge and tell you what's going on, you can have, some kind of play in that situation, because you might have good resources and other things that are available. But if you don't have the relationship first, you don't have anything.
Yeah.
You're just another resource.
Yep.
So it takes extreme vulnerability to be truly authentic and take your guard down. So I just also want to honor that the work people do when they start to create these judgments and negative belief systems around those people manipulating or whatever it is. I just also want to honor that how did they learn to think that way? Because they are in a helper field, right? We don't come into this line of work because we're making $1 zillion.
Yep.
So it just, when I think about it from the macro system, if I'm doing direct service and I start to find myself creating those judgments or having negative opinions or being punitive or what have you, how did I learn that? Why do I allow myself to continue to think that way? And did I learn it from my supervisors? Did I learn it because the process or programs are requiring me to be cautious?
Am I jaded?
Am I jaded? Am I burnt out?
Yep.
Right. And often it's because they're burnt out.
Yeah.
And then they're just like, man, I have to work my ass off to get over here to do this. And then they start like taking it out on others around you. And they're not coming from a trauma aware lens. And they're not coming from a curious perspective. They're not coming from an empathetic perspective anymore.
Yep.
They're coming from apathy and burnout and jadedness. And the more each organization or team members surround each other and talk in that mindset, the more resentment
Mhm.
and the more jadedness starts to happen, and it becomes part of the cultural norm
Yep.
in that type of service. And that is what's unhealthy. And so if you've found your agency or your team kind of get into this place of, very judgmental, a lot of bias, a lot of assumptions, a lot of burnout, all the things, ask yourself why and how it's happening, right? Or how it happened, or was it there when you got there? I know I've been to organizations where I've come with fresh eyes and I'm looking around and I'm like, y'all are toxic.
Yeah,
Right?
for
And I'm
real.
like, why are you in this line of work? You don't even like these people, right?
Right.
And then I had to check myself because I was judging my colleagues.
Mhm.
And then I had to figure out, like, what can I do to start educating or planting seeds to help them become more self-aware of
Yeah.
their part in the problem, their part in this kind of jaded world. And then also help them heal, because I know, being around, seeing people who are reactive because they're being treated like poorly, or maybe they're not being treated poorly by this person, but they were the last 10
Yeah.
people. And so now they're going to treat this poor, innocent, fresh-eyed, heartfelt person. And then that becomes this domino effect, right?
Yep.
So,
Well, and that's why the trauma awareness, I think, is so important.
and our coaching
Yep.
platform allows for us to be able, or companies and teams and organizations, to break down some of this heaviness that these teams are carrying and start bringing in a fresh perspective and helping them unravel and undo what they're currently kind of enmeshed in,
Yeah. And their own traumas.
and their
because
own
they're
traumas.
experiencing things.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's one area that we're doing a really good job, really bringing kind of, it's small scale right now, but we've got so many people in line that want to not only have the coaching platform and our trauma awareness trainings, but also to then be trainers and be coaches for organizations. That's how we're going to unravel some of what's been done. Yeah. So we're just about at time, and do we have any last quick thoughts before we kind of ask people to, what do we say? Are you aware? Are you with us? Right?
Yeah.
Any
Yeah. I
last
mean,
thoughts?
honestly, I just feel like I'm glad that, we had this conversation because, just with working with so many people over the last, 6 years that I've been out here who are truly suffering in houselessness, anything that we can do to promote services for more housing first initiatives, more peer delivered services within those housing first initiatives, I think is important because these people deserve it.
And the people working on the front lines deserve to have healing also.
Yep.
And really want to drive that home. It doesn't matter their role, whether they're first responders, whether they're police officers, fire, paramedic, peer support, crisis workers, all encompassing, really deserve to have some wellness initiatives, and so that they can come from a fresh perspective and a trauma aware perspective to support the growth and the development of these types of new programs.
Yeah.
So it's a teamwork. Teamwork makes the dream work,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
So we really need to think about this whole pie and provide the right resources for healing. How about you? Last.
Very excited to be working with you ladies on this.
Same.
Samesies.
Yeah.
She understood the assignment.
Yes, I do think the need is great, and the challenges will be difficult to overcome.
Yeah.
But I think just starting to get the information out there and to unlearn some of the behaviors that we have learned, and think about how we got to those places in our minds. And really kind of rebuilding community.
Awesome.
Asking even ourselves what happened to you versus what's wrong with you.
Yeah.
It's important.
What's happened? Call to action. Okay, so
action.
call to action. We're going to ask y'all to go out, do some advocacy, wellness, action, recovery, and education in your community. And follow us, subscribe, follow us on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, LinkedIn.
And look for our podcast coming
Oh
out
my
really
gosh.
soon.
Look for our next podcast. And what are we doing next week? I forgot to write that down. So that's a mystery. We'll see you next week.
We'll get there. Have
Take
a good
care.
one.